Hello. All right. Yes, May, I understand. I'm going to have the feedback ready. It's looking like it's going to be early tomorrow. Um, you can go ahead and start, um, and then apply my feedback or Jenna's feedback. But yeah, we will have that done as soon as we can. So as soon as class is done, I'm getting right back on track with marking. Today, by the way, speaking of class, as I mentioned previously, I'm hoping to do a kind of seminar style discussion um, concerning the Satanic Panic and more generally moral panic. So when I say the Satanic Panic, I'm of course talking about well, I guess I want to say the one that's most famous, which is a Satanic Panic that occurred in the 1980s. Of course, there are like little similar panics um, that have occurred previous to the we'll call it the big Satanic Panic. Yeah, Dungeons and Dragons, of course, was a feature in this panic, or I guess some might argue a co-occurring panic, which was subsumed into the broader Satanic Panic. Stranger Things, you know what? I'm ashamed to admit I have not seen it, but I know that it's taking place around that time, right? And it borrows heavily some of those themes. Um, as do, I mean, really a lot of horror movies nowadays borrow from sort of the imagery that we got during the sensationalization of all of this in the press. So Olivia says I need to watch it, so I guess I will at some point. So today is going to be again kind of discussion based. I'm kind of riffing a little bit. I did make some learning materials available. It's helpful if you have checked them out so that you can contribute to the discussion. I'm curious who was able to check some of that out. I posted it yesterday afternoon, so I understand if you weren't able to check out all of it, but some of it included an article from Skeptical Inquirer on discussing the book Michelle Remembers, which we'll talk about momentarily, and a news piece from the 1980s. Um, Okay, that's good. That's good, Thomas. Caitlin as well. Yeah, the documentary is really kind of um where I think there's an opportunity to have a lot of discussion, just given the sensationalist approach that was taken um uh toward this topic in that little news piece. But I thought that this would be fun to talk about because there seemed to be interest amongst all of you, but also because this happens uh, regularly. Um, People get panicked about the devil, about evil things. And of course, the most recent example would be um, some of the controversy that was generated by a couple of performances at the opening ceremonies at the Summer Olympics this year. So, the one that I have immediately in mind is, of course, Gojira's performance. They performed a song, a metal version of a song uh, called Asa Ira, which it's a tune that goes back to the French Revolution. Basically, it means it'll be fine. Um, this is also depicted uh, in news media at the time, political cartoons at the time. There's a very famous one of that appeared in British newspapers, um, which featured demons flying around in the sky saying "it'll be fine" as the revolutionaries decapitated the aristocrats. And of course, this performance featured decapitated aristocrats. This particular one is supposed to represent Marie Antoinette. Um, Yeah, the original "This is fine" meme. Yeah, good way to that's a good way to think of it, actually. Um, so, um, just curious, who had a chance to see this performance? You can watch it here, and it is really best with headphones. It took me forever to find a good version of this performance. But it starts, if you haven't seen it, it starts with this headless Marie Antoinette singing lyrics from the song. So the head is animated. This is a real person's head here, and this is all just sort of fake uh, dead body apparatus here. And then it zooms out, and we get this very heavy performance of this song from the French Revolution. There are headless aristocrats depicted all around I believe it's the conciergerie. Um, and of course, heavy metal has always kind of had satanic associations in the public mind. So this caused a bit of controversy. Uh, in fact, this was amplified on social media. I was not able to find Musk's tweets because Twitter is so crappy now that when I tried to go back to where I would find where Musk was tweeting that this is offensive to Christians and so forth, Twitter kind of crapped out on me. So I wasn't able to reproduce the tweet. But figures from the far right, uh, who I would characterize Musk as one of those, and certainly Andrew Tate, who was another voice from the extreme right, amplifying charges of Satanism, caused this to kind of blow up. And of course, if you search for the performance on YouTube or on Google, you'll inevitably be met with a number of TikToks and YouTube videos claiming that this is satanic, when it's not. In fact, Joe Duplantier, the guitarist and vocalist of Gojira, in a Rolling Stone article, said this. He said, "It's none of that, Satanism. It's French history, it's French charm, beheaded people, red wine, and blood all over the place. It's romantic, it's normal. There's nothing satanic." I mean, we'll get to whether it's problematic to romanticize this in a moment, but for now, France is a country that made a separation between the state and religion during the Revolution, and it's something very important, very dear to the foundation of Republican France. We call it laïcité. It's when the state is not religious anymore, so therefore it's free in terms of expression and symbolism. It's all about history and facts. We don't look too closely at symbolism in terms of religion. So, um, yeah, I think really that about sums it up. I mean, and I'll get to possible reasons why metal music has these associations, in spite of the fact that most metal is not satanic. I mean, there are some examples, but even then, it's not as straightforward as simple devil worship. Um, so yeah, this caused a bit of controversy, but of course, um, it's a clear nod to French history. Um, just in terms of the songs, where it was performed, um, the imagery that's used during the performance. It's quite clearly a nod to the French Revolution. Is it okay to romanticize it to this degree? I mean, say it's not satanic at all, but ought we to, um, I don't know, romanticize the beheading of Marie Antoinette? I don't know. Um, Caitlin says, I find it more likely that something deemed satanic is pagan than genuinely satanic. Yeah, and we can talk about why that is. Um, I'll kind of well, I think there will be an opportunity to discuss why that is in a moment once we get to the panic of the 80s that we want to talk about. But I think that's certainly true. Because if anything pagan is definitionally not Christian, and anything not Christian, it's believed by some, is merely an attempt by the devil to confuse and coerce us, right? But is it Is it okay to idealize this? I don't know. I think that when it comes to art, anything is fair game. But it's important to note that, you know, Antoinette was a very young woman when all of this happened. I mean, I think she was married off at 14 or something, right? She was Austrian by birth, not French. Um, and the whole let them eat cake thing, kind of was sensationalized in the same way that some of the uh I guess some of the lyrics and imagery in heavy metal music have been sensationalized. So is anyone familiar with the true story of the whole let them eat cake quote? We'll just see if anyone volunteers the information in the chat before I go ahead and explain. Well, it's not exactly real. I mean, it's a quote. It's a misattribution. Um, it actually came from a political cartoon. It's not something that I mean, most historians don't think it's something that Antoinette ever said, right? The whole oh, there's no bread, the people have no bread. Oh, well, let them eat cake. Well, she probably didn't say that. That probably came from a satirical political cartoon that was like anti monarchy. So, but people believed that she said it, um, and that helped to foment um, Republican anti-monarchical sentiment during the revolution and the subsequent reign of terror. Um, This will actually be a recurring theme today when we look at another example of a moral panic in a moment. But that's one example. And personally, I can see why people jump on this, heavy music, red, lots of imagery, red, blood, stuff like that, flames shooting out everywhere. I mean, I do know of some people that cannot listen to heavy metal because it's literally almost like an anxiety trigger with the loud noises and the screams and stuff. I personally don't find that. I actually quite like metal. Um but I can see why some people would think, "Oh, this music is angry and evil and frightening and right?" I think that explains a lot of it. Jennifer says, kind of interesting how that happens now with people falling for AI creations and getting bent out of shape over things that have not happened. Yeah, I agree. I saw an example of that just before class. I was scrolling through Facebook and someone had liked a video of these little berries that turned into birds. I was like, "Oh, this is a type of bird from Australia." But if you look closely, you can see the bird beaks popping into existence out of nowhere, and you can tell if you look closely that it's AI. But people are, I mean, that's just all Facebook now. Facebook is all um AI nonsense now. Yeah, Olivia, yeah, rage bait. What not the birds, but the examples you're talking about. Um, yeah, yeah, the AI generated women, yeah, all examples, all quite unnerving. Um, but misinformation and disinformation could possibly come back into play in our discussion in a moment. But yeah, evil, frightening music is cool. I agree, May. I mean, a lot of classical music is heavy in the same way that metal is heavy. And there's actually a lot of overlap in terms of the musical structure of certain kinds of metal, not all, but certain kinds, and classical music. But anyway, that's something I talk about in a different class. So another thing that sparked controversy was, of course, this drag performance, which depicts the Feast of the Gods by Jan van Biljert. I don't speak Dutch, so I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing this. Um, uh, Why did this cause controversy? Well, kind of an adjacent moral panic to the one that concerning Satanism is actually we're kind of in the middle of a moral panic on at least certain sections of the population are up in arms over gay and trans people, and of course drag is a performance art that emerged out of the queer community, right? So certain um, again, extreme right figures like your Andrew Tates and your Elon Musks called this performance out as mocking the Last Supper. Um, yeah, Raheem says we need more whoops, traditional religious representation so we can collectively move on from Christian propaganda. Yeah, I mean, like the Olympics comes out of a pagan tradition. I mean, and that's why they had this performance. Um, yeah, Yennefer, exactly. Yeah, Caitlin, good example. There was a similar moral panic over little Nos X. Yes, it did play into the satanic imagery, but um, wait, in the video for "Call Me by Your Name," he goes and he makes love to Satan, but then he kills him, right? Is that the right video that I'm thinking of? So, um, I mean, is that pro Satan? It doesn't sound like it. Like, yeah, he pole dances down into hell, gets busy with Satan, and then murders him. It's like, I don't know if that's pro Satan, and like, I was genuinely puzzled by the outrage. I mean, but then again, when I was young, I mean, um, the show South Park depicted the devil in a uh homosexual relationship with Saddam Hussein. Um, and that was not made well, maybe it was. I was just too young to remember, but I don't remember that level of outcry against that. Um, but yeah. Um, yeah, definitely not pro Satan, but it is an anti Satan in the way many religious people would have wanted. That's certainly true. And certainly, fornicating with the devil is I guess you're not supposed to do that unless you're married in Christianity, right? So maybe it's not satanic, but it's adulterous. Um, yeah. Yennefer says, to be fair, they've been going after the Doom games for years. That's true, for being satanic, where the whole plot of the game is you're rolling through and killing demons. Yeah, that's right. Um, yeah, May. Again, like there's undertones, it's Satan. It's concern about Satan, but also this idea that Satan is responsible for any kind of deviation from the norm, right? So, but yeah, people were claiming this mocked Da Vinci's Last Supper. Da Vinci's Last Supper is, of course, a fresco that depicts, well, the Last Supper, the original Eucharist, when Jesus and his disciples are eating bread and wine, and lamb would have been served. All very symbolic foods. This blue fellow, I believe, is supposed to be Dionysus. Now, yeah, yeah, this is the Feast of the Gods, which depicts Dionysus and the other Olympians. So the Olympians were the Greek gods that lived on Mount Olympus. And there's various origin stories for the original Olympic Games, but some of them have it that, they're paying homage to the gods who would have competitions on Mount Olympus to see who was the best at, I don't know, throwing spears or riding a chariot or whatever stuff that the Olympians get up to, right? So yeah, this is definitely not the Last Supper. It is the Feast of the Gods, and this individual is Dionysus, who is the Greek god of revelry and wine and the theater. Matter of fact, he's highly associated with musike. which is the origin of our word for music. But musike to the ancient Greeks meant a lot more than what music means to us. Like musike was any of the arts inspired by the muses. So that would include like lyric poetry, playing the lyre, um, uh, oral poetry, but it also would include history and astronomy. Um, so music to the ancient Greeks was a much more expansive category of things than it is for us. Um, anyway, um, so this is Dionysus right here in the middle, and all these other performers are supposed to represent all of the Olympians. And as I've written here, it pays homage to the pagan origins of the Olympic Games. You know, I think something that gets lost on a lot of people, and this is something I discuss in some of my first year philosophy seminars, is that for lack of a better term, Western culture. So I'm talking Western Europe, um, Great Britain, USA, Canada, Australia, the West, again, lack of a better term, um, is influenced not just by the Abrahamic religions. I mean, primarily Christianity, but there is an influence, arguably, of all three, of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Um, People forget about the other half, and the other sort of half of what I've kind of playfully called the Western synthesis in some of these other classes is Greek rationalism, right? Which of course comes out of a culture. Greek rationalism is a response to mythos. Greek rationalism is an adoption of logos, reason, true speech, um, and a rejection of mythos, which doesn't just mean mythology, but stories, legends, um, possibly also music. I mean, Plato did not like musicians. He did not like the theater. He didn't like that. He didn't like that poets couldn't explain how they were doing what they did, like as if their poetry was inspired by the muses. He thought, no, you have to be able to you know uh justify your beliefs. You have to know why the true beliefs you have are true. Poets can't do that. So he was distrustful of poets and actors and stuff like that, right? um but all of this comes out of the Greek tradition. And of course, just look at Renaissance paintings, uh, Renaissance artwork. It depicts angels, for example, not as they are described in the Bible, but in a pagan sort of way, where they look like Cupid, right? This comes from the Greco-Roman tradition. Those are not biblically accurate angels. Or whenever they do a painting of God, like if you look at the creation of Adam on the roof of the Sistine Chapel, God is basically depicted as Zeus. Um, so yeah, I mean, these pagan themes have been there all along. Really, outrage over a performance like this, I think, speaks to one's ignorance of the building blocks of the culture that we live in right now, right? So those are two recent examples. I could go on. I mean, Lil Nas X is a great example. Also, I think at the Grammys, was it last year at the Grammy Awards, Sam Smith performed his song Unholy, something unholy. So the song describes an extramarital affair. But of course, Smith has, I think they were wearing devil horns. And so, of course, devil horns, something unholy. Ah, Satan. Of course, no, the song is about an affair, not about devil worship. But again, people see Sam Smith, somebody who's a little different than they are, possibly represents values that they don't agree with. Um, that's a charitable interpretation. But some people also, I think, really do think that the devil is out to get you, right? Because that's his whole deal. Um, I've mentioned this before. A few years ago, well, I was still in grad school when this happened, but AC/DC played at the Grammy Awards, and they had handed out little light up devil horns for all the celebrities in the front to wear. So like Lady Gaga is like rocking out wearing the little devil horns, and everyone's having a great old time, and AC/DC's just playing some, I mean, they aren't even heavy metal. They're just rock and roll, good old fashioned rock and roll, or dad rock, as the kids call it. And they've had associations with Satan and Satanism since the start of their career. And of course, unsurprisingly, there was a bit of a panic over that. More locally, in 2019, just before COVID really kicked off, the Satanic Temple, which is an organization of Satanists, held their first Black Mass in Canada. This is not a picture of that Mass. This is a different Mass, if I'm not mistaken, but they held it in Canada, and they actually held it in Ottawa. They actually held it at my favorite bar, which is the Coven. Um, yeah, it's a great restaurant. Yes, Caitlin, yes, I'm glad you know about it. Um, yeah, man, during my PhD, that was my spot. And it's got really great art on the walls. If you catch a show at, say, Mavericks, actually, Mavericks is now owned by Mehdi, the guy who owns the Coven. It's the same guy, he owns Mavericks as well. And if you catch a show at Mavericks, you can often meet the band at the Coven after the show, a metal show. And they have great burgers. What's the one I get? The Pazuzu. You got to get the Pazuzu. It's got like a savory sauce and cheese curds and like pepperoni in the burger, like in the patty. Very greasy, but so good. Yeah, Mehdi, I believe, is a Satanist. Uh, which is why he hosted the Satanic Temple. But I mean, look, first of all, actual Satanists are pretty nice people. Um, I'm not a Satanist. I'm an atheist. Satanism, I'll be honest, to me, it feels a little artificial, but I totally respect your right to practice it, just like any other religion. Um, but Satanists are generally pretty tolerant. They're fans of religious pluralism. The Coven is a safe space for all kinds of different folks. It's a welcoming environment. Um, of course, when the um, when the Black Mass was held there, there were protesters across the street. And I kind of did a pass. I didn't go down Murray Street, but I did do a walk through the neighborhood. And by the time I went, there were a few people left carrying their signs, repent, so forth. Um, but yeah, modern Satanism, I mean, a lot of Satanists don't even literally believe in Satan. That's what I was trying to get to, I think. A lot of Satanists are actually atheistic Satanists, and Satanism is kind of like a life philosophy. Um, which I get. There are some theistic Satanists, but most of the Satanists I know are like atheistic Satanists. So they don't literally believe in the devil. It's more about like a life philosophy where um I well the Church of Satan is different than the Satanic Temple, but when I was an undergrad, I had a friend who lent me the Satanic Bible by Anton LaVey, and it was like, what did it remind me of? It reminded me of reading Nietzsche, except that Nietzsche would have thought Satanism was silly. Um, because he would still say you are you're using these sort of zombified elements of religion. Although maybe he wouldn't. Maybe they would say, "Oh, sure, yeah, they're doing their own thing, revaluing their values and stuff. Maybe that's fine." So I don't know. It kind of had that vibe though. Yeah, typically, Yennefer says typically, even the ones who that do believe in Satan, the dogma tends to lean into this being exists and doesn't really care that you exist. Yeah, yeah. So just have a good life. Monica says, my best friend is a Satanist and I'm an atheist. She's the nicest person I've ever met. Yeah. And so are the others I met. They're also atheistic Satanists. Yeah. I mean, um, I've never met a Satanist who seemed to me to be cruel or hateful in any way. Yeah. Yeah, exactly, Caitlin. I think that's what I was trying to articulate when it comes to Nietzsche. It's not really like God is dead and we have killed him. Oh, I'll be a Satanist then. Like what? He would do a double take at that. Even though the sort of like there's very much a kind of like um the idea that Nietzsche tries to convey with the Ubermensch is the sort of individualistic conquering of your weaknesses and defining your own values is there in Satanism, but it's dressed up with stuff it doesn't need to be dressed up with. Like these robes and here's a cauldron here, I guess. I mean, I guess some people are into it. It's cool. Um, so that's that's a little example of something from Ottawa just a few years ago, a little bit of a satanic panic. Caitlin adds, it seems like almost any sort of doctrine or creed with clear, persistent principles is still holding on to the idea of an external truth. Yeah, which Nietzsche would consider to be a remnant of God. Yeah, like truth with a capital T, which Nietzsche thinks is even if that exists, truth with a capital T, who cares? Why not rather untruth, as he says in Beyond Good and Evil? Um, so what are some other things that I meant to get out of the way? Yeah. Well, I don't know. Just look, it's a welcoming, nice community. Actually, I have a Christian friend who would come to the coven with us, and he was perfectly welcome there. You know, he was fine. Um, his favorite sandwich was the Cthulhu, which is a burger between two grilled cheeses. So yeah, if you want to just if you want to have your own feast of the gods, the coven is definitely the place to do it. Oh, where's it? Yeah, good poutines. Yeah, I like the municipal waste. It has, I think, bacon and ground beef in addition to cheese curds. And all of their foods are named after monsters, demons, or metal bands, um, which is nice. Like the Pazuzu, that's the demon from The Exorcist. My partner gets the Demu Burger, which is a play on Demu Borgir, which is a Norwegian black metal band. Anyway, sorry. Yeah, it's a good place. I mean, it's good. I like it. I haven't been in a while. I think I want to go when I'm back in Ottawa. Um, so these little satanic panics, and indeed the satanic panic of the 1980s, are arguably examples of what Stanley Cohen calls a moral panic. So moral panic is a term introduced by Cohen, who's a sociologist and criminologist. I don't like to quote Wikipedia, but I do think that their definition of a moral panic is quite good. A moral panic, it is written on Wikipedia, is a widespread feeling of fear that some evil person or thing threatens the values, interests, or well being of a community or society. And it's important to note that Cohen characterized this as a sociological phenomenon. It is not a mental health condition. So it's not like mass psychogenic illness, what used to be called mass hysteria. It's not like that. It's sociological. So people are not mentally ill when they experience anxiety over some perceived evil person or thing that threatens their interests or their values. It's actually probably a rational response. It's just that the thing itself might not actually represent a threat to those values and interests. But Cohen identifies 5 stages um, to a moral panic. First, some kind of threat, or I suppose I should have emphasized perceived threat to society and its values, appears on the scene. So sometimes the threat is real, right? I mean, gun violence in the United States, right, is, I would say, is a real threat, and a lot of people are outraged over it. Whereas certain other perceived threats, like, I don't know, illegal immigrants, right, um, might not actually represent the threat that certain people say that it does. So anyway, some kind of threat, real or perceived, appears, and then the threat is amplified by the media. That's stage two. In stage three, thanks to the amplification of the threat, anxiety or fear or concern begin to propagate through society. Everybody gets talking about it, right? I remember when I was young, this happened shortly after the Columbine school shootings. Um, so during those shootings, the two individuals, I forget their names. One of them was Dylan something. I read a whole book on this years ago, but they wore trench coats to conceal their firearms when they went to go and commit the shooting. And so on the news, word began to spread of the trench coat mafia. Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Dylan and Eric. You got it, Yennefer. Um, so they wore these trench coats before they went and shot up the school. And then in the media, we started to get sensationalized news reports of these kids wearing trench coats. Why are they wearing trench coats? Are they in gangs? Are they going to shoot everybody? What's going to happen? Um, it even got to the point where the school that I was attending, it was elementary school at the time, prohibited students from wearing trench coats. Um, and by trench coat, I mean most of them weren't even trench coats; they were dusters. But still, any long coat was prohibited over fear that a student might be hiding weapons. Um, so that was propagating through the general public when I was going through elementary school, and of course, I understood none of it at the time because I wasn't old enough to really get what was going on, right? Then on stage four, moral gatekeepers, as Cohen calls them, respond to the threat. These could be public figures, like public intellectuals, like moral, for lack of a better term, moral leaders, like religious leaders, um, politicians, certainly. Um, and then the threat is dealt with, and everybody stops worrying about the threat in stage five. Yennefer says, this continued for a long time. As a prolific wearer of trench coats, I remember this causing some issues with school administration. Yeah. Yeah, and at the time I didn't really understand, but there were a lot of arbitrary rules when I was in school about dress. Um and really these co-occur these continue to occur periodically. I've seen pieces on the news about students, like high school students in Ontario and Quebec, um walking out in protest of school dress codes prohibiting sleeves that are too short or shorts that are too short. um and they were upset, the students were upset about this because it was incredibly hot. The temperature summer, you're still in school, in elementary school and high school, into the beginning of the summer, and it gets quite hot in some of those buildings, so some of the students were mad about the dress code. Yeah, 2016 Killer Clown, that was the Joker guy, wasn't it? Was it a movie theater? Shooting in a movie theater that we're thinking of? That sounds like what that was. Hey, I mean, while we're on the topic, oh, there were killer clown. Okay, that's creepy. Uh, yeah, yeah, Thomas, I think that's what I have in mind. Stuff like that. Um, and on the subject of clowns, people have always been kind of panicked over the insane clown posse. Um, so, for whatever that's worth. But those are the stages, right? We get some threat, real or perceived. This threat is amplified. You can see this in the 2020 news piece. The amplification uh, causes fear, anxiety, concern to propagate. Moral gatekeepers respond, and the threat is dealt with. So, what are some examples of moral panic? Generally speaking, well, obviously the Satanic Panic of the 1980s. But I tried to come up with a list of other ones that I could think of just kind of off the top of my head, and this is what I came up with. So, alcohol prohibition in, I believe it was the 20s. That was caused by a sort of moral panic, um, which I think was motivated by a certain, the beliefs of um, a certain number of Christians. Um, Alcohol prohibition. I mean, alcohol is terrible for you. I'm not going to argue that it's good for you, but during prohibition, you had still like people still continued to produce alcohol. And since it wasn't regulated, it could be quite dangerous. I mean, if you don't distill alcohol properly, then your alcohol can be contaminated. The alcohol we drink as a recreational drug is ethyl alcohol. But when we make alcohol, we also produce isopropyl alcohol, and that is extremely bad if you drink that. Very bad for your liver. I mean, not that alcohol isn't already bad for your liver. This is worse. Um, so if you don't distill it properly, you're going to contaminate alcohol. And also, stills can explode. Um, yeah, not good for safety reasons. Caitlin says, from what I understand, alcohol was seen as a threat to the family, which is why many women were prohibitionists. Yeah. And there's also sort of the demographic is very Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Um, so yeah. I mean, I'm not going to say alcohol cannot be a threat to the family. I mean, certainly not everyone, but uh some people do have a tendency to become violent when they're intoxicated, um, which is probably where some of the prohibitionists were, that's probably where they were coming from, what they were thinking of. The war on drugs, and I've put here, especially crack cocaine and cannabis for two reasons. Each of these were associated with racial minorities, right? Cannabis prohibition, I mean, cannabis was used by foreign workers from Mexico and other Latin American countries, just kind of as a way to relax. That's where the name marijuana comes from. It is literally Spanish for Mary Jane. And after alcohol prohibition ended, um, we needed something for all these people to do, all these people who were policing alcohol prohibition. And that's how the DEA in the United States, the Drug Enforcement Agency, got started. Um, and so basically, once alcohol prohibition ended, cannabis was demonized. Um, it was said that it would cause you to become insane or violent or sexually deviant. It would make you take on these traits that were also negative traits that were associated with racial minorities by racist white prohibitionists. Um, yeah, and that film by well, Yennefer Reefer Madness. Have we seen Reefer Madness? Anybody? It is quite something. Reefer Madness is a real propaganda film. We don't actually know who produced it, but it was kind of in the 60s and 70s. It was remarketed, um, uh, to people so that they could have a laugh. But at the time, in the 20s and 30s, people took this quite seriously. But it's got people, um, smoking a little bit of weed and then going mad and jumping out of windows or murdering people, beating people up. It's absolutely insane. And there were a lot of films like this, which associated cannabis use with criminality, sexual deviancy, etc. And likewise, as we get a little bit closer to our time, there was a similar moral panic over crack cocaine, which disproportionately affected Black Americans. Nobody seemed at the time, this was in the 80s, nobody really seemed to care about powder cocaine, which is the cocaine that white professionals were more likely to be using, and crack cocaine was demonized. I remember very clearly in the late 90s in elementary school when they would have cops come to class and talk about why you shouldn't do drugs. And I remember very clearly this police officer. It's a wonder they have police officers and not physicians or social workers. Yeah, like a dare. I'm not sure if it was dare, but it was something like dare. And he's got all samples of all these drugs and the crack cocaine in particular. I remember him saying like, "Oh, it's so bad that if you do it once, you'll be addicted forever." And I don't know. Even as a kid, it seemed a little strange to me. Um, I actually asked this police officer, I said, what do you think about people who need medical marijuana? I think I was in grade 7 or 8. It's like, what do you think about people who need medical marijuana? And he said, you know what? Somebody says they need marijuana because they've been smoking too much marijuana and they've damaged their brain. Well, too bad. And I'm like, even as a kid, I was like, that's not what, no, medical like for chemotherapy or for Parkinson's or like I was like, what? That was one of the first moments growing up. You know how you have these moments as you grow up that when you realize that adults are not as smart as you thought they were? That was one of those first moments for me. I started to realize that adults are not always knowledgeable about everything. So, but yeah, crack cocaine. That police officer was particularly concerned about crack cocaine. Don't even know where anybody would have got crack cocaine in Northern Ontario in the 90s, but um, also the devil's music. Here's another moral panic I thought of. This I'm using as a catch-all term for outcry against different kinds of music. So, whether you're talking Gojira's performance or the drag performance at the Olympics, or you're talking about concern over lyrics that advocate for violence in hip hop, or indeed anything else. I mean, this is an old trope. The idea that music is demonic or of the devil. Robert Johnson, why do I mention the blues here? Robert Johnson was a formative figure in the Delta blues, which is the original blues that originated out of the Mississippi Delta in the southern United States, and it emerged on plantations. Yeah, crossroad blues. Yeah, exactly. Going down to the crossroads because he's going to meet the devil and make a deal with the devil. So Johnson is coming out of this musical tradition that emerged on plantations. Yes, they still had plantations. The United States had abolished slavery at that point, but a lot of those people of color who were descendants of who had been enslaved or were descendants of slaves would continue to work on those plantations. And on these plantations, they had what were called juke houses. Um, it's the same origin for our word jukebox. It was just like a sort of a small building where everybody would get together and play music, right? And the blues kind of emerged out of that environment. But of course, we're also dealing with um, a sort of a sort of culture where there's high levels of religiosity and superstition. So Robert Johnson himself, it was suspected by some at the time from the area that he had made a deal with the devil in order to learn to play the guitar as well as he did. Of course, Johnson isn't the first one. I mean, uh, does anyone know Paganini, Niccolo Paganini, the violinist? Some claimed that he was so good at the violin, he must have made a deal with the devil. Um, and of course, rock and roll. When Elvis Presley emerged on the scene, making those hip gyrations, people didn't want to show that on television. They thought it was sexually obscene, and because he was playing rock and roll, it could be devilish music, perhaps. Um, as rock and roll gave way to rock and then to metal, as music got louder and heavier every time, you kind of get a new little satanic panic kind of thing happening. Um, and nowadays, when you go and listen to this music, it actually seems quite innocuous. I mean, go listen to the Crossroad Blues. It doesn't sound satanic to me. Go listen to some early heavy metal, Judas Priest or Saxon or something like that. It does not really sound satanic. New wave heavy metal, like Iron Maiden, very famous song, The Number of the Beast. I dare you all after this to go watch that music video and tell me if you have any legitimate concerns that it is satanic. It actually is quite cheesy by today's standards, right? And of course, hip hop gets lumped in with this because, because hip hop is predominantly produced by black artists, and there's a sort of othering thing I think going on there. Satanic panic often associates the perceived threat with an other, a sort of outsider. And even though hip hop is not usually considered satanic, other than those like Little Nas X's video. Oh, there's a moth on my glasses. Um, it is still there's still an othering phenomenon that happens. And the argument is that it glorifies violence, which I think if you're being intellectually honest, no, it doesn't. I mean, not all the time. I'm not going to say that it never does. I mean, a recent example where there is certainly some glorification of violence would be drill music. Um, However, if you look at the original, gangster rap, like, the NWA, a song like Fuck the Police, is really about racism in the police force, not just like, hey, let's go kill some cops. That's not what it's about. It's a protest song, right? But because it's anti-establishment, people get up in arms about it. Yes, that is true. That is an issue. The frequent and severe objectification of women. Even women hip hop artists uh, almost self objectify. And I think that's a systemic issue within the industry. Um, so yeah, that I'll definitely agree that that is a problem. Um, McCarthyism, definitely a moral panic uh, over communism in the 1950s. Um, the Red Scare, right? It's named after a U.S. Senator, Joseph McCarthy, who would investigate people who were suspected to be communists. Uh, so this is the era in which let's see. Yeah, Reds under the beds. Yeah. I think if one were, Caitlin says, I think if one were intellectually honest, they'd have to admit that most of all of our media glorifies violence in some way, shape, or form. To only attack hip hop and not say action movies or TV shows is absurd. Yeah, exactly. Um, I mean, stories are interesting. I use that term broadly, stories, right? Stories are interesting when they feature conflict or adversity. There needs to be a conflict or some adversity, and the conflict gets resolved or the adversity is overcome for the story to feel satisfying, right? And oftentimes that is expressed violently, right? Like I've been watching House of the Dragon, right? And it's like super violent. It's got people getting, impaled and burned by dragons, eaten by dragons. Um, yeah, it leans pretty heavily into the violence. Um, but it's good. Yeah, I agree, Olivia. It's a good show. Or like I had a student in a class previous to this one who said that they had just started watching Game of Thrones, and I said, "What do you think?" And they're like, "Oh, I don't know. There's a lot of beheading and death and incest and everything." And I said, "Yeah, there is a lot of that throughout the show." And they're like, "Oh no, I just watched the first episode." Like, so yeah, that it's like watching. I mean, actually, Carlton's own Jim Davies, I think, does a good job of discussing this in his book Riveted. Like people are interested in other things that involve people, which is why and if there's like violence or excitement, it's why we rubberneck at car crashes, right? It's the same with these TV shows. So yeah, fair point. Um, so McCarthyism was a sort of political moral panic. And this, as I was about to say, is kind of the period during which the United States it's hard to articulate what I mean here, but they definitely leaned into the Christianity. This is the period of time when In God We Trust was placed on American money during the Red Scare. This was the time when one nation under God was added to the Pledge of Allegiance in American schools. Why? Well, because the Soviets were officially atheistic, right? Yeah, exactly. Like Yennefer says in the chat, they had to counteract the godlessness of the USSR. So the Americans got In God We Trust on their money. It wasn't on there before the Cold War. And one nation under God is actually a modification of the Pledge of Allegiance. It didn't originally say under God. It said undivided, if I'm not mistaken. One nation undivided. Um, so yeah, it was kind of a response to the Soviets, because the Cold War was very much an ideological war. Uh, yeah, anti-theistic, yeah. The Soviets, yes, Thomas, that's true. Stalin was not a fan of religion, although he did promote himself religiously. I mean, the Soviet Union might have been atheistic, even anti-theistic, but that's because the equivalent of the god was the of God was Stalin. Was Stalin means man of steel, right? There was no God, but the next best thing was Stalin, the Secretary General of the Communist Party. Um, so yeah. A couple more contemporaneous ones, illegal immigration and the Great Replacement conspiracy theory, right? Um, Donald Trump descending the elevator, um, talking about how illegal immigrants bring crime and drugs and etc. I mean, Trump arguably won that election partly on the back of a moral panic about illegal immigration. And this has given rise to some awful vitriolic, hateful stuff like the Great Replacement conspiracy theory, which is promoted by various figures on the extreme right, and which has its roots in some really old anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. But the idea is that, well, shall we say, people that look like me are being replaced by people who do not look like me. Um, yeah, in England at the moment, yeah, because of this, well, lots of reasons, but it's amplified by those figures like Tommy, your Tommy Robinson types. Um, Although I will say it is encouraging to see the counter protests. Um, but yeah, it's fueled by hate and misinformation, and the idea, the target is typically Muslims, right? Um, the target of the Great Replacement thing is uh, typically people who come from the Middle East or from Southeast Asia or from Africa, and who just happen to be Muslim, looking to build a life for themselves. Yeah, when Irish royalists and Republicans have united against immigrants, it's pretty bad. I mean, yeah, come on. I mean, guys, like you still like look, Ireland, you've still got reunification ahead of you. Please keep focused on being angry at the English, okay? It's fine. The immigrants are not going to don't worry. But you get this in the States too, with the sort of argument that illegal immigrants are going to come and take everybody's jobs. Well, newsflash, they're not working the jobs that you want. They're doing the jobs that nobody wants to do. Um, but yeah, the Great Replacement, although it emerges out of, I think, some old anti-Semitic tropes, really the people who are targeted the most with this conspiracy theory are Muslims, and I think it grows out of this moral panic over illegal immigration. And speaking of moral panic over Muslims, I mean, I came of age right around 9/11 and the War on Terror, and I'm not really a fan of Michael Moore as a filmmaker. But I think that one thing that his Fahrenheit 9/11 film depicted quite well was the moral panic over Muslims or people who look like Muslims. To people who didn't know any better, I should qualify that. So there were numerous cases of assaults and murders in the United States after 9/11. Murdered Sikhs, not Muslim, just because people associated uh, the headwear with Muslims and associated Muslims with terrorism. Thankfully, this has changed a lot, which I am so happy about. Yeah, when I was young, especially growing up in Northern Ontario, which is not the most diverse place on the planet. I don't know if you guys know this, but it's not the most ethnically diverse place on the planet. I mean, we primarily Anglo-Canadian, Franco-Canadian, and First Nations people. Other families, maybe Dutch, German, Irish ancestry, some Finnish ancestry. Predominantly white European ancestry. Not the most diverse place in the world to grow up. And so, after 9/11, there was that panic over the other. Um, but I think that that sentiment has really changed. A lot of the people I interact with understand that, no matter what religion you are, chances are you're just trying to get by and live your life. Um, So, another one that's kind of pertinent to another panic that we find ourselves in the middle of is the Save the Children campaign, which was run by singer turned orange juice spokesperson Anita Bryant. And it was just anti-gay propaganda. The immediately below, I've got the anti-trans propaganda, the child grooming moral panic, which is essentially a repackaged version of the Save the Children campaign. Did she get a pie in the face? Maybe. Maybe there's another Anita Bryant. Oh, she did get a pie in the face. Well, deserved. Oh, the convoy people. Yeah, they're also worried about this grooming nonsense. Yes, yes. Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. You're probably right, May. Yeah, and Caitlin said she did get a pie in the face. Yeah, Anita Bryant was a propagandist who made this association between you know, being gay and um being a risk to children, you know. Yeah, protect the children thing. I mean, that's what it is. You know, I've got a slide featuring a meme someone made of Mrs. Lovejoy from The Simpsons, you know, please think of the children. And it is very much that. Um, but yeah, the Save the Children campaign was awful. And what we're seeing today is just basically a rebranded version of that, you know. So your J.K. Rowlings and your Elon Musks who are amplifying this sort of trans panic. Um, you know, this is why you need to know your history, right? This is the same propaganda campaign, just adjusted away from gay people to trans people. The Pizzagate QAnon stuff is leaning pretty heavily into the conspiracy theories, but the idea is that the elites are satanic pedophiles who drink the blood of children, right? And if you're not familiar with Pizzagate, the idea was that some, you know, the emails of Hillary Clinton were hacked, and it was thought that in some of those emails to, or was it Anthony Weiner? It was Weiner. His emails were hacked in a phishing campaign, and people thought they found coded messages alluding to satanic pedophilia rings. And they believed that they had identified you know, some pizza shop where this was taking place in the basement. And a guy actually went in with a gun to free the children. I mean, the place didn't even have a basement. But people, you know, thought this was really happening. And it led to the QAnon conspiracy theory, which has it that an individual with Q clearance is posting secret messages outlining how Donald Trump was going to secretly fight the pedophiles, and the storm would happen eventually, where there would be mass arrests of all of the liberal elites who were apparently satanic pedophiles. And of course, it never happened. Yeah, insane stuff. What other examples of moral panic can you think of? I know that I've got a big list here, but not an exhaustive list, surprisingly. Yeah, Raheem, I agree. Well, this is part of the value of philosophy, right? Um, this is our stock and trade as philosophers, critically examining um, claims and concepts. And absolutely, when people ask what is the value of philosophy, well, of course, I'm tempted to say, well, philosophy should be done for its own sake, but also it does teach you how to think. Um, and that is so important. The West Memphis Three, I'm not familiar with that. Could you tell me a little more about that, Raheem? Yeah, Jake, violent video games. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's another one I grew up in the middle of. So, you know, if you wanted to play Mortal Kombat on the Nintendo, on the Super Nintendo when I was growing up, I still have my Super Nintendo and it still works. Um, Good little piece of tech. But if you played Mortal Kombat or Killer Instinct, the blood would not be red. It would be like green or purple. It was red on the Sega Genesis because the Sega Genesis was kind of marketed to an older audience, but the Super Nintendo was like supposed to be family friendly, right? So Nintendo actually made them change the color of the blood, right? It was basically a case where three boys came up, murdered three other boys, were wrongly convicted of their murders due to them liking magic and metal music. Ah, of course. So, yeah, definitely a good example. Oh, I never played Resident Evil on N64, so I didn't know about that. But that's pretty good. I played the crap out of Ocarina of Time, though, and Star Fox 64. Those two games were like my jam on the N64. Yeah, yeah, audio, yeah, censoring. Well, censoring in anime versus manga. Oh, sorry, I can hear some thunder over there. That sounds lovely. Yeah, censorship in anime and manga is interesting. So, like, if you read, I've read a little bit of the Attack on Titan manga, where you see all kinds of blood and guts. I mean, granted, it's in black and white. In the anime adaptation, you don't see nearly as much of that, right? And that's probably because death is a taboo in Japanese culture, right? Traditionally, the people that were responsible for dealing with dead bodies were of the untouchable class. And that's why it's also bad luck to, if you're ever in Japan, I've never been to Japan, but I have a friend of mine who's been to Japan and who is now currently teaching English in South Korea. Anyway, I asked him once because I had heard, about chopstick etiquette. I said to him, I said, "Hey, I heard that you're never supposed to just stick your chopsticks in your food and leave them there. Is that true?" He said, "Oh yeah, 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 that's definitely true. That you don't do that because it reminds people of the way that of the sticks that are used to pick up the bones from a cremated body and place them in an urn. So it's very rude to do that, apparently. So if you're in Japan, don't stick your chopsticks in your food. Put them down on the table in the little chopstick holder." You ever see somebody who like can't use chopsticks to save their life? I know someone who we went out for sushi, one chopstick in each hand, trying to saw a little piece of nigiri in half. And I was like, oh my God, like, what are you doing? So yeah, like it's kind of funny. I get it. They can be tricky, but yeah, chopstick edited. Yeah. Yeah, one bite. Yeah. And apparently you're even supposed to go fish side down into the soy sauce. There's some kind of Bon Appetit video where some sushi chef explains it. But yeah, there's a right way and a wrong way for sure. What other examples? We have the Memphis 3, violent video games as an excellent one. Um, well, violence on television, right? Um, Again, when I was growing up, parents would see things on the news about, well, there were two big examples. It was the Power Rangers and Dragon Ball Z. The Memphis Three. Well, Raheem explained the Memphis Three. We scroll up here. He says that there were these three boys that were wrongfully convicted of a murder, and they liked magic and metal music. So I'll have to read up on that a little bit more because that's a case I'm not super familiar with. But Raheem has provided a few details. But yeah, well, we didn't have that many television channels when I was growing up, so I didn't watch Dragon Ball Z until years later. But I did watch the Power Rangers. Actually, the 90s was a weird time because at school, everybody was like, oh, the Power Rangers suck. Everybody pretended to hate the Power Rangers. Everybody secretly watched the Power Rangers. And I had the Megazord, like I got it for my birthday. I had the robot that made all the little robots that came together into a big robot. I got that for my birthday and it was so sick. and I brought it to school, and everybody was like, "Whoa, cool," you know. So everybody liked the Power Rangers, even though no one said they liked the Power Rangers. Um, but there was worry about the Power Rangers because it was violent and yeah, yeah, Olivia, you remember that too. Yeah. No, but nah, no, we all watched it. Come on, we all watched the Power Rangers. And that opening theme song went hard. Um, I learned to play it on the guitar. I would like to make a cover recording of it when I have the time. But yeah, that intro goes pretty hard. TV intros in the 90s were pretty epic. Yeah. Oh, speaking of the 90s, I didn't see Buffy, but X-Men, that intro also went hard. Actually, who's seen X-Men 97? It's kind of like a continuation of the 90s series. It's really good. It's so well done. Yeah, so well done. And kind of, I don't know, X-Men, Uncanny X-Men fits with the themes of the class. Very good. I think I might go back and watch the original one. Jake's too young. No, you're never too young. Go and explore the pop culture of yore. It's great. Um, oh, nice. Monica had the original on DVD. Yeah. I mean, you can watch X-Men 97 without having seen the 90s X-Men. Yeah. Yeah, you could do it like Yennefer is, and you could watch the old one after you've seen the new. It works. Like it's its own storyline. You definitely don't need to have seen the original one. But it does continue. So, yeah. Yeah, May's seen lots of this, so we can all we can enjoy it. Violence on TV, yeah. So Power Rangers, Dragon Ball Z, X-Men, I guess, and Batman the animated series also on the same time. And yeah, I mean it's cartoon violence. I mean, then again, like I knew people around this time whose parents didn't even let them watch The Simpsons, even though The Simpsons is not particularly obscene. I mean, I kind of get it because the humor, it was satire. You're definitely not old enough if you're growing up in the 90s watching The Simpsons on syndication. You're not going to get all of the jokes, but you're not going to be exposed to anything obscene. Like, yeah, it's not South Park. I remember, when I was young and kids started watching South Park, and I checked it out and I was like, whoa, we're definitely not supposed to be watching this. Like, it's not like The Simpsons. Um, and early South Park wasn't even that good as far as I'm concerned. Daria, I don't know this one. But yeah, early South Park was was bad and it got kind of okay. It still has some episodes I don't like there's some problematic stuff, but it's hit and miss. Yeah, Daria. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, Monty Python was I think I probably first saw that when I was a teenager. And hey, Life of Brian. There was a moral panic over the life of Brian because certain religious individuals believed that they were making fun of Christianity, which they absolutely were. Um, but the life of Brian, if you haven't seen it, is about Brian, who is a reluctant um, Messiah sort of figure, and he doesn't want to be the Messiah, but everyone kind of thinks he's the Messiah. Yeah, yeah. So, Life of Brian. And I want to say, like, in a lot of these moral panics, they can be taken advantage of by people who have an agenda. Okay, so you need to be very careful, I think, when you're engaging with people who, for example, talk about freedom of speech. Are they arguing in good faith or bad faith? Because the people that are arguing in good faith want the freedom to express ideas that other people may not agree with. We'll get to this in a minute when we talk about another moral panic, and that is over Socrates, right? Um, but those who argue in bad faith for freedom of speech often want the freedom to, you know, utter hate speech, not to say something which may be true but controversial or offensive. They literally want to cross the line into hate. Um, that's why you see a lot of free speech warriors on Twitter or X, whatever it's called, talking about the importance of free speech, but all they're doing with it is insulting minorities. Um, yeah. So you have to be careful to make sure that people, yeah, yeah, you're right, Yennefer. They're also always the same sort of people that want to curtail other people's rights. Daria is in the same universe as Beavis and Butthead? Oh, I didn't know that. I like to think that King of the Hill and Beavis and Butthead are in the same universe, but they've never really done a crossover, even though it's the same creator. I like to tell people that King of the Hill is my favorite anime, even though it's not really. Well, it's one of my favorite. It's a good show, but yeah. Let's see. How are we doing for time? 3:56. Oh my goodness. We better take a break. Let's come back at I don't know, 11 minutes after 4. Sound good? All right. I'll see you then. Okay, we're back. Let us continue. So, since this is a philosophy class, I would be remiss if I did not talk about Socrates and his trial and execution, which arguably had a bit of a moral panic element to it. So I know that I've probably asked who's a philosophy major before. I know some of you are, but just for the people who are here, who is a philosophy major, or otherwise, who is familiar with the life and death of Socrates? Um, Thomas, we got a philosophy major in Thomas, um, or minor. Oops, minor philosophy minor. Olivia knows about Socrates. Good. So for those who don't, this is kind of very short, um, a very short introduction. Okay, Caitlin knows a bit too. So good. I can kind of power through this. So Socrates was an Athenian philosopher, the first philosopher of the classical period in Athens. He was a teacher of Plato, and Plato was in turn a teacher of Aristotle. And those are the big three. But Socrates didn't write anything down himself. So most of what we know about Socrates comes from writings of his contemporaries, and of um, people who came later. So Plato wrote dialogues in which Socrates features as a character. Xenophon also wrote about Socrates. Um, Aristotle writes about him, but arguably didn't know him. And Aristophanes was a satirical playwright who used Socrates as a character in some of his plays, like Wasps and Clouds. Um, so a lot of what we know about Socrates comes from sources other than Socrates himself, because Socrates did not write anything down, right? This painting, by the way, this is The Death of Socrates by David. Here's Socrates about to drink the cup of hemlock. This is actually Plato here, although according to the dialogue Phaedo, which details the last moments of Socrates' life, Plato was not present at his execution. And in the background, you can see his wife and children being led away. His wife Xanthippe famously was quite upset in the dialogue. The Phaedo is where you can read about his final hours, but it's a weird dialogue because well, it's not that weird, but it's odd to us perhaps because Socrates is there with his wife and children, and she's crying because Socrates is about to be executed when the sun rises, because his death had been put on hold. Like the story is, so the Athenians would send a delegation to Delos to commemorate the voyage of Theseus, a legendary Athenian admiral, sailor guy who rescued some youths back in the day, back in the mythical past. So it's a holiday from the time that this ship sets sail to and returns from Delos. No executions can take place. So Socrates has been in prison for a while, but this is the eve of his execution. He'll be executed the next day, and his wife is really upset. And Socrates says, like, hey, just take her out of here. Let's just talk about philosophy, guys. And he talks about all the reasons why he's not afraid to die with all of his friends, but not his wife and children, who he's had taken away, so that he can bro down with his buddies. Um, yeah. Jennifer says, I find him a little insufferable, but I always have respected that he sticks to his guns, that the state cannot be wrong in judgments, and accepts his execution. Yeah, and that's true. We do get there in the apology, but not immediately. Um, so uh, what we can say about Plato's dialogues, at least, is that earlier ones probably reflect views that are closer to the historical Socrates' actual views. Later ones are probably more of Plato's voice, right? But Socrates would ask questions about everything. He thought of himself as an intellectual midwife. His mother had been a midwife, and what Socrates meant was that, um, see, Socrates believes that all knowledge is innate. It's already present in the mind, but we forget it because of the trauma of birth. And so what you have to do is ask the right kinds of questions. Um, you have to use the dialectic or the Socratic method. You'd introduce a state of confusion or numbness, aporia. And once you get confused, then you can eventually come to know these innate ideas, a kind of recollection via recollection or anamnesis. So the ideas are already there, and Socrates just helps to bring them out in the same way that, the baby is there, and the midwife helps uh, the woman birth the baby. So the ideas are Socrates' babies, and he's helping to bring them out into the world from within the mind. Um, if you want to read more about this, the Phaedo is good. The Meno is really good. The Meno is where Socrates gives an example of this kind of thing with Meno's attendant, a slave who was untutored in geometry, and he does the geometry exercise, a very famous exercise where he claims to show that he's helped the attendant recollect knowledge of geometry that he always had. But it's important to note that it's probably just knowledge of the forms, which Plato thinks is innate. In the Meno, it sounds almost like all knowledge is innate, but in the Phaedo, it's only knowledge of the forms that's innate. So anyway, read the Phaedo and the Meno if you want. You can find those on the internet for free. But Socrates asked questions that were critical of anyone and anything. He was also quite disdainful of democracy, and eventually he would be accused by three statesmen, Anytus, Melitus, and Lycon, of corrupting the youth and of the crime of impiety, or not believing in the city gods. Right. And as I was saying, Socrates had a public image where I think he was a bit of a contrarian, a bit of a sophist, even though he was not a sophist. The sophists were teachers, wise ones, which would teach you, rhetoric, how to argue, how to be a good public speaker for a fee. Socrates wasn't a sophist, and he never took money for his teachings. but he was certainly perceived to be a sophist. And this might be because of his depiction in Aristophanes' plays, where he's depicted as somewhat of a sophist and somewhat of a natural philosopher, someone who studies nature, or physis, even though he was neither of those. So Aristophanes depicts him this way, and it contributes to this public image of him as a sort of disruptive uh, guy who thinks a little too much for his own good, not unlike the public perception of how how the public perception of Marie Antoinette, which we discussed earlier, was shaped by satirical political cartoons. Socrates' portrayal in Aristophanes' plays also shaped the public perception of him. But yeah, he was accused of corrupting the youth by teaching them, like relativism, which he was not doing. He didn't take money for his teachings. He denied that he was impious or an atheist, because he believed that daimon spoke to him, a little voice that told him what was right. Again, this can be read. It's sometimes, I think, erroneously read, uh, as implying that Socrates was schizophrenic. That is not the case. Um, Remember, the Greeks were animists, so all of your thoughts came from a god or a spirit, ultimately. His prosecutors may have also believed that he was a threat to the newly reestablished democracy, because Socrates was openly disdainful of democracy. Um, the masses, or the hoi polloi, the rabble, did not have educated, informed opinions because they weren't trained in philosophy, so they shouldn't be in charge of anything. Then again, you've got to keep in mind that democracy in Athens was limited to older property owning men. So if you didn't own property, if you're a woman or a slave, you didn't have the rights. You weren't a citizen, so you didn't have the right to vote. Only older property owning males. But this is right around the time post Peloponnesian War, right? Um, Athens and a collection of city states known as the Delian League were engaged in a war with Sparta and roughly the other half of the city states in the ancient Greek world. Sparta was the land power, but Athens was the naval power. But Athens did lose that war. And so you had this sort of reign of terror following Spartan's conquest of Athens, where you had the 30 tyrants. Um, and then finally, democracy is reestablished. And Socrates is disdainful of this, but the powers that be, like Anytus, Meletus, and Lycon, some of whom were associated with those 30 tyrants, thought that Plato might have been a threat to democracy. So he was brought to trial before a jury of 501 of his peers. They would have all been Athenian citizens, so all older property owning men. And Plato gives an account of this in the dialogue, The Apology. Now, the apology, of course, does not mean I'm sorry, right? Socrates was not out there in front of all of his peers saying, I'm sorry for corrupting the youth. No, apology in this context comes from apologia, which means defense. So the apology is Socrates' defense that he gives of himself at his trial. Um, However, he is found guilty and put to death. Initially, he's kind of like, what the hell do you all know? But he does accept the punishment, like as Yennefer said, because he loves Athens so much and believes in the state so much that he will die, because that's what the state has determined will happen. Yeah, like apologetics, exactly. Like if you say that somebody like, C.S. Lewis was an apologist for Christianity, that means that what he's doing is defending the faith, not saying, "Oh, I'm sorry about Jesus and everything." No, no, he's defending the faith, right? Um, so Socrates is condemned to die. How will he die? Drinking hemlock. That's what's in this cup. So poison hemlock causes this ascending paralysis, which eventually paralyzes the lungs. Not a fun way to go. And Socrates probably could have just gone into exile had he stopped upsetting the status quo. Um, but he would not. He would not do so. According to Plato, Socrates is kind of presented as this, you know, um, this sort of headstrong, sort of free-thinking individual, who almost like he doesn't have a choice in what he's doing, right? He says, life without inquiry is not worth living for a man. If he stopped doing philosophy, he might as well be dead. So just kill me. That's the picture we get from Plato. And that's what happened. Socrates was put to death. Um, I think arguably there is an element of moral panic to this. And I think maybe you could apply even Cohen's stages, where first a threat emerges that Socrates is spending time with the youth, and he's putting all kinds of wild ideas into their heads, like ideas about the perfect forms and democracy and et cetera, et cetera. Um, this is sort of seized upon and amplified by the powers that be, Anytus, Meletus, and Lycon, for example. They are also the moral gatekeepers. They bring these charges against Socrates. Socrates is found guilty and executed. The threat goes away. Um, what do you think? Do you think that we could characterize this as possibly a bit of a moral panic, a heavily political one, certainly? I think, yes, it's quite plausible that there's some element of moral panic to this. Yeah, exactly. He's grooming the youths to believe that well, his detractors would claim that he's instilling in the youths this idea that morality is relative, which again, the character Socrates in Aristophanes' plays does this, but the real Socrates, or at least the Socrates we get from Plato, does not. He did believe in objective truth and objective goodness. Yeah, Mac, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, maybe moral panics inevitably get politicized, you know? I mean, the whole Trump descending from the escalator and then giving a speech about how immigrants pose some kind of existential threat to America. I mean, that's inherently political. As I said, he arguably won that election at least partially on the back of a moral panic and probably a lot of amplification of misinformation by domestic and foreign actors. Um, of course, the whole Hillary's emails thing didn't help. Um, and he's still at it. I mean, he's still. Trump also made some comments about the opening ceremonies of the Olympics. It was a disgrace. Yeah, I can't do a very good Trump impression, but you know how he just kind of pretends to care about everything. Like, he called it disgraceful. He's back on Twitter, and now he's saying, oh, of course I'll when I'm president, I won't let men compete in women's sports, which is another transphobic trope. That was the other element of the moral panic at the Olympics that I didn't discuss. It wasn't just the opening ceremonies, but I'm sure you've all heard of the controversy surrounding Iman Khalif from Algeria, who J.K. Rowling and those guys, seize upon this sort of trans panic again. As far as anyone knows, Khalif is a cisgender woman who's just really good at boxing. So, but yeah, he is campaigning. Yeah, Mac, you're right. Uh, um, that stacking the court to get rid of to strike down Roe v. Wade, I think is awful. Um, and irrespective of what your opinion on abortion is, the fact is that within the healthcare community, it is regarded as an important form of reproductive healthcare that women in lots of states now don't have access to. It really is like taking America back to the 1950s or something. Yeah, Thomas, I don't know this athlete, but I imagine even if there's a trans athlete competing, they still have to conform to certain like there are still certain like regulations that have to be met in terms of like how long you've been undergoing HRT and when you've transitioned and so forth. So like even when there are trans athletes, there are steps being taken to make sure that it's fair for everyone involved, right? But yeah, like I didn't even know that because no one's making a big deal because no one cares. I'm sad to say, but the people that are getting up in arms about, Iman Khalif don't care about the Paralympics, and I would argue that they don't even really care about women's sports. I mean, they're not watching women's sports unless there's a controversy like this, right? But yeah, Yennefer, you're right. She won gold in the welterweight division, and um she's pursuing legal action, which I think she absolutely should do. Yeah, Jake, Project 2025, giving me a moral panic. Me too. Um, Caitlin says, I'd say there's definitely an element of moral panic, for he was questioning the underlying values of Athenian society every day, even though there were definitely more threatening people like Thrasymachus or Callicles or even the Cynics. It seems like Socrates was a scapegoat for the fear anxiety of the changing times. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, May, good point about rolling. She's kept her mouth shut because of the pending legal action. But Caitlin, that's a really good point. And if you read the Republic, for example, there's a very interesting discussion over dinner between Socrates and a few other interlocutors, including Thrasymachus. And Thrasymachus is the realist, right? He's the might makes right guy. Socrates is trying to say, like, look, what's good, you know, gets its goodness from the form of the good or participation in the form of the good. People who are good um, have knowledge of the form of the good. And Thrasymachus is like, no, Socrates, I can just beat you up right now. I can kill you because I'm big and strong and I can do that. So it's fine, right? That's realism in the political sense, whereas Socrates is an idealist. And you're absolutely right that he's scapegoated. Um, I mean, there are some very interesting comparisons that you can make between Socrates, since we're talking about a sort of Western synthesis, um, a synthesis between Abrahamic religion, elements of Abrahamic religion and the associated value systems on one hand, and Greek rationalism and philosophy on the other hand. You can draw interesting comparisons between um, Jesus of Nazareth and Socrates. Neither of them wrote anything down, for example. They both had a school or disciples, students of some kind, and they were both executed by the state. Um, Socrates was executed by the Athenians, and Jesus of Nazareth was, of course, executed by the Romans. Um, did Jesus of Nazareth cause some moral panic? He probably was perceived as a threat to the powers that be, the puppet government in Judea at the time, which was King Herod or whatever, but he was really just a Roman vassal, and Pontius Pilate was the governor, right? Making sure that Herod did things the way the Romans wanted them done. Um, so there are some interesting comparisons that you could probably explore there. And that actually leads us to another example of moral panic, and that is blood libel. And this one is a nasty one. Blood libel is the accusation often made against Jewish people of ritualistic sacrifices. It goes all the way back to Roman times when it was the early Christians who were still arguably a sort of subsect of Judaism at the time when they were being persecuted. But blood libel is a charge that would be brought against Jews in Middle Age Europe, um, where they would be accused of horrible things like child murder, ritualistic sacrifice, drinking blood in order to incite people against the Jews. And this plays into things like the fabricated protocols of the elders of Zion. And this is the sort of modern source of the conspiracy theory on which there is a secret Jewish cabal that wants to take over the world. The protocols first appear in this document, which is the Great Within the Minuscule and Antichrist. And I cannot stress this enough. The protocols are absolutely a forgery that were absolutely plagiarized from other thinkers. They're pulling quotes from like Machiavelli, for example, on, when he's trying to teach the Medicis how to run their city-state in Italy or wherever, on how you have to be ruthless political leader. They're taking this stuff out of context, plagiarizing it, and putting it into a document that's meant to look like some kind of secret master plan, right? Um, and they've been presented as fact. For example, during the Third Reich in Nazi Germany, the protocols were taught to school children as if they were fact, and they are not. They are made up uh, with the express aim of persecuting the Jews, right? And this whole thing played a direct role in the Holocaust, right? So, and continues to play a role in anti-Semitism to this day. So also passion plays, right? Passion plays. Like, have you guys ever seen The Passion of the Christ? Mel Gibson's film. I mean, I wouldn't encourage you to watch it. It's probably the most violent movie I've ever seen. Um, but the passion of the Christ, what does that mean? Well, passion comes from pathos, which actually means suffering. So it's the suffering of Christ. And what the film does, and what earlier passion plays did, would depict Jesus suffering greatly before and during the crucifixion. Um, that's well, there's a few different movies where that happens. I mean, Gladiator, Ben-Hur. Um, the Christians were killed in the Colosseums. Yeah, absolutely. But the Passion of the Christ depicts the last hours of um, Jesus's life. It's a Mel Gibson film. Um, it's like I said, it's probably the most violent movie I've ever seen. And that movie and Passion Plays were designed to arouse sympathy uh, for Christ and his followers and incite people against the Jews. Because um, in both the movie and the Passion Plays, it's the Jews and not the Romans that are depicted as the people responsible for his execution. Yeah, their depiction of Lucifer was cool. They were kind of like, it was like NB Lucifer, like kind of like non-binary, has a snake, is trying to tempt Jesus all the time. A much better movie is The Last Temptation of Christ. Oh, I'll have to check that out, Mac. Jesus of Montreal. I don't remember that. But yeah, The Last Temptation of Christ is pretty cool. That's a good movie about Jesus. But Passion of the Christ is really in that tradition of passion plays that would incite a moral panic against the Jews, um, which is not a good look. I mean, it's this kind of thing that led to pogroms in Europe, that led to the Holocaust, and which still plays a role in anti-Semitism to this day. So I don't know. I said here maybe it's a slippery slope from moral panic to anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, but a slippery slope fallacy isn't a fallacy if the slope is actually real, right? And a lot of the themes that emerged in this kind of like really vitriolic anti-Semitic stuff are still there in conspiracy theories promoted by the extreme right. So when you hear Alex Jones, for example, talking about globalists or elites, those are dog whistles for Jews, right? Oh, Olivia has to go. Okay, take care. Thank you for being here. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Um, oh, go from a really negative to a really positive and back to a really negative. So the back to the negative, it's a these terms, globalists, elites, liberal elites, blah 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 blah. They are anti-Semitic dog whistles. The a dog whistle, by the way, is a term that, sounds innocuous to somebody who's, uninitiated. If you don't know about the history of anti-Semitism, you're going to think a globalist is just somebody who favors globalization. But if you do know, um, it's a way for racists and anti-Semites to communicate with one another while maintaining the illusion that they are not being racist or anti-Semitic. So globalist, elite, etc., are dog whistle terms for Jews. So if you hear that, alarm bells should go off in your head. Sounds like there's a duck around here somewhere. I think it might just be a dog toy, though. But yeah, I mean, maybe Cohen's characterization of moral panic can apply to passion plays, claims of blood libel. These certainly um, play a role in the QAnon conspiracy theory. So I talked a little bit about Pizzagate and a little bit about QAnon, but I mean, how much do we really know about QAnon? Everybody who's here, are you familiar? Not familiar? It's probably something you've heard of. I don't know how much you know about it. It would be worth discussing, though, briefly. Okay, some of you are familiar, some not. Q is supposed to be a person with Q clearance. That's nuclear secret level clearance. Who is posting on internet boards like 4chan, these cryptic messages, which again were all about Trump fighting the deep state. That's another dog whistle. Um, Never really came to anything, but um, the followers tended to be far right Trump supporters who believed that um, the world is run by elites who are satanic pedophiles who drink the blood of children in order to ingest adrenochrome. Um, what? Oh, you mean the message boards, Raheem? Like get stoned and read QAnon like that? Is that what you mean? I can imagine that would be quite a roller coaster. Yeah, I used to do the same thing with Ancient Aliens, right? Burn one down, throw on a little Ancient Aliens for a good laugh. It's fun. Um, yeah, Caitlin, I'm really surprised by how far it went. There is a documentary on it, which I've been meaning to check out. It's kind of fizzled out. Yeah, a really funny part is that they think the Denver airport is some demonic zone because it has a scary horror statue and weird murals. Yeah, I mean, I am quite convinced. I'm not this kind of doctor, but I am reasonably convinced that a lot of the people that really buy into this, I mean, sure, a lot of them are just um it's a matter of exposure over time, but a lot of them are also not well. I don't know how many of them are unwell, but there is it's there is a sort of an increased susceptibility to pareidolia and apophenia, which is also correlated with you know uh kind of schizotypal ways of thinking, paranoia. um there some of these people just have these personality traits, and some of them are genuinely ill, like mentally ill, and then some of them are just pulled in. They go down those rabbit holes, like Jake says, echo chambers, um, you know, which reinforce their beliefs. Eventually, they get separated from the broader community and spend more and more time in these echo chambers. I mean, I know this one guy from around here actually who I used to chit chat at the he worked at the convenience store, and I used to chit chat with him when I'd go there taking breaks while writing my thesis. And we talk about interesting stuff and all kinds of things. And then years later, I ran into him again, and he's been sucked down that anti-trans rabbit hole where it's like, hey, haven't seen you in years, so what do you think about trans people? And I'm like, oh, what? Are we really doing this? So anyway, I had to walk away from the conversation because I could tell that it had kind of become an obsession, like it's almost he had gotten into the Jordan Peterson and the Ben Shapiro, whatever those group of people are. And yeah, I had to walk away because I was like, okay, he's been red pilled. Like sorry, get a life. Like it's really sad actually, you know. It's a pathway to being lonely, wrong, and very probably hateful. And that's just sad, you know. Caitlin says there's also big social pressure to holding certain beliefs and towing the line to maintain status with the communities online. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a big thing in the incel community. I think YouTuber Natalie Wynn, right? I've mentioned her in a number of different classes. Former philosopher turned YouTube essayist, I guess we could call her. But she's got some good videos on incels and the alt right. They're not scholarly sources, but they're very well put together and very well argued. And I think it'd be good to check out if you're interested in that sort of thing. But now before we run out of time, we've got to actually talk about the Satanic Panic. And the one that the one that we think of when we think of the Satanic Panic is probably the Satanic Panic of the 1980s. This is a figure who's often associated with Satanism, but not actually Satan. This is actually Baphomet. Baphomet was a god that the Knights Templar were accused of worshiping way back during the Crusades and after the Crusades. Basically, the Knights Templar probably became too powerful, and the church became a little worried about that. So they were accused of being Satanists, and they made this up. This Baphomet character. So Baphomet has a goat's head, which also, the iconography of demons and devils having different animal parts like wings, goats' heads, and goats' feet is probably comes from paganism, associating paganism with the devil. So, um, wow, you got quote. Wow, really? By Graham Linehan. What a dude, that guy. Look, that is a sad story. Um, because oh man, like Father Ted was funny. The IT crowd was funny. And he just doubled down I guess for those who don't know, he created those shows along with Black's book. So all three sitcoms with massive cult followings, really well written, really funny, and he just doubles down on this insane transphobia to the point where his wife and family left him because he was just like hateful all the time and just like why? I don't understand why anyone wants to go down that road, you know? That's insane. So what did he quote tweet you? What did you tweet that he retweeted? Because yeah, I imagine you might have gotten dogpiled by his followers, right? Because he's like rolling in that he has a big social media presence and a lot of followers. Um, yeah. Well, tell us about it if you want. But yeah, this is Baphomet. Goat feet, goat head, probably because the Christians wanted to make pagan stuff seem evil. And of course, this is a bit like what a satyr would look like in according to Greek mythology. They've got ambiguous features, male and female features. Just kind of a weird looking creature, which might inspire fear, right? Oh, you tweeted a selfie on a friend's post and he retweeted saying, wow, what the hell? That's crazy. That's insane, Yennefer. That's insane. Wow. I'm sorry that that happened, and that it was such a it was Graham Linehan. What a oh God, what a piece of work. It honestly it sours, like I don't get the Harry Potter stuff because I never read it, so I don't know what that's like. But I do get it with like like a show like the IT Crowd, which I think mostly was I mean, they had that one episode that was arguably transphobic, um but otherwise it was a pretty funny show that I thought was, actually a decent representation of like neurodivergent people. Um yeah, and then it turns out that Graham Linehan is just an awful human being, and now it's like hard to enjoy. I can still enjoy the actors' performances, but it's really soured it for me. So anyway, um so the Satanic Panic in the 80s, it was alleged that thousands of children were being subjected to satanic ritual abuse. And it's due to a confluence of factors that this happened the way it did and unfolded the way it did. But probably, films like Rosemary's Baby or The Exorcist influenced the public's outlook on this stuff. I haven't seen Rosemary's Baby, but apparently it's about Rosemary who has a baby who's going to be used by the Satan worshippers for Satanism stuff. I have seen The Exorcist. It's a classic. You know, a girl is possessed. What's her name? Reagan is possessed by a demon called Pazuzu, and they've got to exorcise it. And by nowadays, it doesn't seem so shocking. But when it came out, this would have been an incredibly shocking film. Because it depicted things that just were not shown on screen. Um, Moral panic over Dungeons and Dragons, um, and heavy metal, which again I'll explain in a minute, is very seldom actually satanic. But in the documentary, the short news piece, you can see people flipping through examples of heavy metal records, and honestly, they got some classics there. There was some Ozzy. They had Judas Priest, Iron Maiden. Who else did they have? Um, oh, Black Sabbath, of course. I don't remember who else. I know they listened to some Led Zeppelin, which is not even heavy metal. I mean, it's like metal adjacent and certainly influenced metal, but Led Zeppelin is not metal. Um, it was interesting actually. At one point in the news program, they had an expert whose job was to identify hidden satanic messages in music. Yeah, right. It was very sensationalized. Um, like it's insane. This was, and I it was like I don't remember all of the journalists on it, um but I think it might have been Chris Wallace's dad. But Barbara Walters too is there at the very end, and I'm like, wow, these are supposed to be respected journalists, and they're doing this sensationalistic, satanic panic nonsense. This is terrible journalism. May says the satanic panic of metal and D&D makes me wonder if the reason so many D&D playing metalheads is because they found one or the other through the panic propaganda. That's highly possible. Um, uh, a lot of metal, the metal that I like to listen to, which is power metal, symphonic metal, progressive metal, a little bit of melodic death metal, overlaps very well with science fiction and fantasy. And of course, Dungeons and Dragons is a fantasy game, right? So, um, a lot of heavy metal music has themes like that are drawn from J.R.R. Tolkien or from Dungeons and Dragons or from other elements of science fiction and fantasy, and it just works. Like it just works incredibly well. Um, my dad initially got into the occult in his teens because of the sensationalism around Crowley. Okay, interesting. Yeah, Aleister Crowley. That's very interesting. Yeah, the occultist from back in the day. Um, yeah, they were, Caitlin. Yeah, they were in this news piece. They were trying to be, they were presenting themselves as objective, but they were absolutely making some very spurious leaps in reasoning. I mean, the police, the law enforcement people that were being interviewed said numerous times, like, "Oh yeah, we can't prove it. We have no evidence, but I just know it's happening, and I've got to catch these Satanists." And it's like, I can't believe we let you people be cops. Like, I seriously think a, a lot of people in law enforcement should not be like, it's insane. Yeah. But yeah, Metal, Dungeons and Dragons, it all just works. Like, and I got recommendations. If you like Tolkien and Metal, Blind Guardian, you got to listen to Blind Guardian. Nightfall and Middle Earth, amazing album. It is a heavy metal retelling of the War of the Jewels from the Silmarillion, or probably my favorite band ever, at least right now, Unleash the Archers, who are from Canada. They do power metal, and they have Apex and Abyss are kind of two parts of a story, a very fantasy driven story where an evil queen called the Matriarch awakens the immortal so that she can bring him her four sons to sacrifice so that she can in turn become immortal. And then in the second album, the immortal returns and helps the grandson of or helps the son of one of the matriarch's sacrifice sons take revenge and end the matriarch's reign of terror. Look, it's really good. Okay, like I just, if you like it. Oh yeah, Hammerfall's a good example. Yeah, they're power metal as well. So yeah, lots of great stuff there. I don't know what it is, but sci-fi and fantasy and metal just work together. Um, The most important thing, though, was the publication of Michelle Remembers by Michelle Smith and Lawrence Pasder. Now, Pasder was a psychiatrist who was treating Smith for depression. Um, Later, they would get married. So, kind of sus, a little bit unethical. Using memory recovery therapy, which has now been discredited under hypnosis. Pastor claimed to have discovered evidence that Smith had been the victim of this ritualistic satanic abuse at the hands of the Church of Satan, not the actual Church of Satan. In fact, Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan sued these two for defamation over these claims. But this book was an instant bestseller. They earned $100,000. Again in 1980, that's a good chunk of change. In a hardcover advance, and almost $250,000 in 1980s money for rights to the paperback edition. There was talk of a movie starring Dustin Hoffman. They did the talk show circuit, and they even consulted, particularly Lawrence Pastor, consulted on other alleged cases of um, satanic ritual abuse, which you can actually see if you watch that 2020 piece. Pasder is interviewed in that piece. The book was also endorsed by the Catholic Church. And thanks to word of mouth and the widespread use of of hypnosis in recovered memory therapy, eventually we got something like over 12,000 alleged cases of satanic ritual abuse, which involved or were claimed to have involve blood sacrifice and well as Sword in this Skeptical Inquirer article describes it. According to Smith and Pasder, when Smith was just 5 years old, between the years of 1954 and 1955, Smith's mother turned her over to a satanic cult called the Church of Satan, which, according to Pasder, predated the Catholic Church. And Smith was physically, sexually, and psychologically abused. She was forced to watch and participate in human and animal sacrifice and eat and drink feces and urine. And she was buried alive in Victoria's Ross Bay Cemetery. Yeah, Victoria, BC. These two were from Canada. Finally, the abuse culminated in an 81-day ritual known as the Feast of the Beast, where Satan himself appeared, speaking in Dr. Seuss-esque rhyme before the Virgin Mary herself intervened to kick the devil's ass and free Smith from Beelzebub bondage. So a little hyperbolic, a little, little creative with the language, but none of the claims here are actually exaggerated. This is what the book claims. And Pastor is a practicing Catholic, and I think that's fine. But you can't let it color your professional opinion of a patient, which, if you're being professional, you probably also shouldn't be in a romantic relationship with, because there is a power imbalance there. So there is just so much that stinks about this. Pastor's practice of getting close to his patient is unethical. I think that the financial element is problematic. You know, the book deal, and I think he is biased by his own religious belief. Yeah, the Grinch. Well, he is a mean one. I think the Grinch is a good villain. The Grinch, it's like an automatopoeia. It's like the Grinch. It just sounds like what it is, a green, grumpy guy who doesn't like Christmas. The Grinch. Mm. Oh, I can taste it, right? So, as I said, over 12,000 alleged cases of satanic ritual abuse, and law enforcement took this seriously, with Pastor even consulting on some of these cases. And again, the attitude of law enforcement, at least the ones interviewed, I'm not saying that all cops are morally panicked, um, but the people interviewed in this documentary are like, it's disturbing. These law enforcement individuals, these detectives, seem to really believe that this was going on in spite of the lack of any physical evidence. None of these cases, none of these cases were ever found to have actually happened. None of them. But the documentary interestingly identifies three kinds of Satanists. You've got your self-styled Satanists who are, simply like, hey, I like Satan, I'm a Satanist. Then you got your religious Satanists, so Satanic Temple, Church of Satan. And then you got your satanic cults, which I assume are the ones who were believed to be carrying out this ritual abuse. Although I don't really, I mean, and I'm not being facetious here, but I don't understand what the difference is supposed to be between a religious Satanist and a cult Satanist, or a religion and a cult generally. I don't understand what the difference is supposed to be here, other than maybe members isolating from the broader community to a greater extent than you see with religion. Then again, some religions are like that, some varieties of Mormonism are like that. I mean, the Amish, the Mennonites, they live somewhat separately from the general population as well. So yeah, maybe. Yeah, Caitlin. Yeah, we could have like a leader who has a sort of coven and shares his or her particular doctrine, right? In any case, I don't think these are actual labels that Satanists use. They're made up by the people who put this news piece together. It also identifies signs your child might be a Satanist, including coffins. So if your kid has a coffin, he might be a Satanist. Other paraphernalia, so pentagrams, candles, cauldrons. I mean, this is quite broad. Like, what is satanic paraphernalia? Is my copy of War Pigs by Black Sabbath satanic paraphernalia, right? Or paranoid? Actually, yeah, they ended up calling the album Paranoid because of the Vietnam War. So if I have Paranoid on vinyl, does that count as satanic paraphernalia? Yeah, and yeah, like Caitlin says, candles are broad. Like, I mean, the Catholic Church has candles all over the place when you go for mass, right? Kidnapping. Well, if your child has been kidnapped, they might have been kidnapped by Satanists, or they might have been kidnapped by who knows who, right? Sexual abuse. obviously concerning on its own. Um, Cannibalism, again, if your child is engaged in cannibalism, I mean, would I even worry if it was Satanists? I mean, I think I'd just be worried about the cannibalism and cremation, um, which was the reason why law enforcement would maintain that we know this is happening, but we can't find any evidence because the Satanists cremate the bodies once they're done with them. How convenient, right? Yeah, Yennefer. Like, well, is it is satanic cannibalism even worse? I think any kind of cannibalism should be frowned upon. Um, so yeah, I mean, this documentary, I think it's not a documentary; it's just a news piece. Watch it here if you want. Um, this kind of sensationalist journalism was quite common. It's a bit less common now, although you still have your Fox News and Newsmax and those sorts of things. Um, but it's less common to see sensationalism, I think. At least if you find a reputable news organization. I mean, I try to keep a diverse collection of sources of news, and I try to go for stuff that is not sensational, that doesn't sensationalize anything when I'm getting my news. So I'll listen to, you know, the CBC is good. Um, the BBC is good for some stuff. Al Jazeera is good. Deutsche Welle, I like Deutsche Welle. Um, Democracy Now, very good. So, kind of center or left leaning, non-sensationalist. I'm not saying only the right wing ever sensationalizes it. It's not Fox News that's the only one. Fox News isn't the only one that did this. The reason why when you used to go buy a CD that had explicit language, it would have a warning, like parental advisory, explicit language. The reason that's there is because of a group of U.S. senators' wives, led by Tipper Gore, Al Gore's wife, who was a Democrat. Um, yeah, yeah, BBC when it's not English news, for example, that's a good example. Yeah, like BBC World. Um, but yeah, like what was I saying? Well, yeah, I mean, it used to be in the 90s, it was the moral panic was coming from left-wing people. Um, and so anyway, that's the reason why there are these stickers um well, I guess nobody really buys albums anymore, but when you did, or either vinyl or CD or cassette tape, there'd be a parental advisory put there because it was demanded by concerned politicians and their spouses. Yeah, Mac, good point. Everyone should watch that. That was part of all of this. Yeah, Dee Snider from Twisted Sister, Frank Zappa from Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, and John Denver of Leaving on a Jet Plane fame were like congressional witnesses during this debate who were all advocating for freedom of speech. And like this is good if it's in good faith. Like I want freedom of speech so that I can write a song about whatever I want. That's good free speech. That's the good faith stuff. The bad faith stuff is I want freedom of speech so that I can say the N word or something. No, 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 no. That's not what freedom of speech is for, I'm afraid. Um, in any case, and the music. Did anyone catch the part where the expert? I was about to say this earlier, but he's the expert who would look for satanic messages in music, and he puts Led Zeppelin Stairway to Heaven on and puts it backwards, and it's like my sweet Satan, and it's claimed that they inserted a message, uh my sweet Satan, which could only be heard when you played it backwards. I don't know why you would ever do that. It's not like we like that kind of subliminal messaging doesn't work. Also, I mean, this is textbook pareidolia. Yeah, I can't believe they called him an expert. I thought this is garbage. This is garbage journalism. Um, Generally, if musicians have a message, they say it in the lyrics, like clearly. Um, they don't hide it by making it so you have to play it backwards. It's just it's absurd. And of course, when you hear that, my sweet Satan, that is classic pareidolia. It's the same as the ghost hunters who record the ambient noise and think they hear a voice saying something in particular. It's the exact same phenomenon. And notice how this piece did not have one expert from psychology arguing against any of the points they were making. It's incredibly biased. And the panic that resulted from this book, from documentaries like this news piece is an example of the amplification that Cohen was talking about. Um, I mean, this affected people's lives. As I said, Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan actually sued Pazder for defamation. There were false accusations and wrongful convictions. And Pazder eventually tried to distance himself from some of the claims that were made in this book, I think somewhat unsuccessfully. I think that he should probably have not ever been allowed to practice again. Um, it's just absolutely gross what this resulted in. But Cohen, for his part, thinks that the Satanic Panic is perhaps the best, the clearest example of a moral panic there ever could be. And I think we can see how his model applies. And it applies to other examples today. Something happens, a perceived threat, it gets picked up and amplified. Um, Worry seems to spread, moral gatekeepers to the rescue, and then it goes away. And often the concern is, and here we go in this meme somebody made from Mrs. Lovejoy in The Simpsons, won't somebody please think of the children? I don't know if y'all have seen those classic episodes of The Simpsons, like up to season 9 when it was really good. But oh my God, it was good satire. And yeah, Mrs. Lovejoy is kind of the puritanical, like, think of the children, sort of, always feeling moral outrage over something or another, while her husband, Reverend Lovejoy, doesn't seem to care. There's one episode where the children are under the care of Ned Flanders, who a really devout Christian, and he finds out they haven't been baptized. So he calls Reverend Lovejoy uh, to explain that the Simpson children, Bart, Lisa, and Maggie, were never baptized. And Reverend Lovejoy, remember, he's the Reverend, says to Ned Flanders, Ned, have you thought about trying one of the other major religions? They're all pretty much the same. Um, and then his train crashes. Absolutely bonkers. Um, so this is moral panic right here. Please think of the children. I think we're all pretty clear on how Cohen's model can apply to all of the cases that we've looked at. We are running out of time. So real quick and just for fun, dispel this myth that heavy metal is satanic. It's usually not. Some heavy metal music features satanic themes, I think particularly Norwegian black metal. But even this is not always an endorsement of Satan. Some of it is, like Mayhem, Gorgoroth, bands like that, which also have some problematic members. I mean, members who are, into Nazism and stuff. So there's like, I think that the Nazi black metal guys are a bigger threat than the satanic black metal guys, although there is some overlap. Um, but a lot of it is actually for shock value. Same with death metal. Yeah, and there's a long tradition of this going back through Marilyn Manson, um, Ozzy Osbourne, Kiss, Alice Cooper. It's called shock rock for a reason. Oh yeah, the murder. Yeah. Yeah, didn't one guy murder? Yeah. Um yeah, so it's yeah, I'm not going to say it's completely non-existent, but there are problematic people in every subculture. A lot of the stuff that's apparently satanic is for shock value, and some of it is almost like a lamentation. Like some bands are just like, they sing about Satan, but it's all like, oh no, we're all enthralled to Satan and we're doomed to sin. Boo, life sucks. And, that's what they sing about, right? It's not like celebrating Satan. It's like, oh, bummer, Satan. Um, the devil horns is, there's been moral panic about this. And this was popularized by Ronnie James Dio right here. Ronnie James Dio, um, replaced Ozzy Osbourne in Black Sabbath. He was also vocalist in a band called Rainbow. Um, and he had a pretty successful solo career as Dio. Um, and so he popularized the devil horns, which certain people took to mean, took as a sign of the devil. It's not actually. Ronnie James Dio was of Italian American heritage, and he would talk about his grandmother, his Nona, who did this to ward off the evil eye. So it's not the devil horns, it's to keep the devil away. And that's where that originally came from. Um, so yeah, metal, not satanic. Not satanic at all, unless it is, and even if it is, there's murder, Nazism, something else that's probably a more pressing concern. That's it. Wow, it's been fun. What a class. I really enjoyed putting this lecture together. Yeah, like the pentagram, which is only yeah, yeah, the technically it's only satanic if it's upside down, and often Baphomet's body or head will be overlaid on top of it. Um, I had a lot of fun putting this lecture together, and I had a lot of fun teaching this course. I always do. But everybody made it so good, and there was a lot of interesting discussion this term, and I hope that you all enjoyed it. Um, before we wrap up, do you have any questions about anything? Yeah, thanks, Raheem. Yeah, Jake, it goes by so fast. Um, yeah, Thomas, good point about the inverted crosses. Um, yeah, I hope you all enjoyed this. I certainly did. Um, Jenna and I are working on getting your proposals finished. As I said, later tonight or tomorrow, we will be done. Tomorrow at the latest. So we are working. Thank you for bearing with us. I think we're both just at that period in the summer where stuff kind of piles up, but we will get that all done and back to you. And you know what? Like if you needed an extra day after the deadline, you got to submit a day or two late for your final paper because you want to make it really good. That's probably fine. I won't tell anyone. I don't know why I'm whispering. Um, because this is going on the internet after all. But that would probably be fine. So don't panic. Um, Example essays. Well, I don't reckon. Well, not really. Try and do what Blackmore does in the chapters that we read from her book. Try and do something like that. I can't really share example essays because I don't have permission to share student work like that. Um, yeah, but I would try and do something similar to what the authors of our readings do. And of course, if you guys think of any other questions, I'm going to be keeping an open door policy over the exam period. So reach out with an email and I'll probably answer the same day, even if it's on a weekend. So don't be shy about reaching out. But I want to thank you all who are here for sticking with, this is the special topic stuff. I'm not quizzing you on this. We're just doing this because it's fun and interesting. Thank you for being here. Thank you for everybody watching at home. This class is an absolute treat to be able to teach every summer. Um, and it's my favorite. And I always get a really eclectic, curious bunch of students like you all. So thank you so much for being here. I wish you the best of luck with all of your futures, and maybe I'll see some of you again in some of my classes this fall. If not, take care. If I am to see you later, then farewell and see you again soon. Bye, everyone. Oh, great. Well, I'll see you then, Jake. Thanks, Caitlin. Have a good one. And thanks, Raheem, Yennefer, Thomas, Aaron, everyone who was here. Thank you all so much. Take care of yourselves. Enjoy the rest of your summer. I'm looking forward to reading your papers. Reach out with any questions, please. Okay. Bye, everyone.